Hey there, welcome or welcome back to the Business of Story. If this is your first time here, I'm your host, Park Howell, author of Brand Bewitchery, How to Wield the Story Cycle System to Craft Spellbinding Stories for Your Brand, and the new book, which I wrote with my good friend, Dr. Randy Olson, called The Narrative Gem for Business, which will take you on a deep dive into how to craft compelling and, but, and therefore ABT statements to hook your audience from the very start. I am so glad you are with us today. So I got a question for you. Have you been burning the midnight oil to build your business and you are producing a ton of fabulous content to capture your ideal customer's attention, but you feel like you're going unnoticed? Well, if so, we've got just the guest for you today with an attention-grabbing process that just can't miss.
Very few entrepreneurs either like the communications part of the business or have got the time for it, worry about cash flow, product development, suppliers, recall. We've all got lots of things to think about. But we need to have a consistency of approach, Park. So knowing how often and where you're sending your information is the fifth part of Speak PR.
Man, oh man, I am the entrepreneur Jim James is talking about right there. So involved, so busy building the business. Sometimes it's just really hard to focus on your content and story marketing. Well, today he shared with you the fifth step of his speaker PR process. And throughout the show, you are going to learn about the other four. Jim is the founder and chairman of EASTWEST Public Relations Group. He has over 25 years of marketing experience in both business and consumer-facing industries in Asia. His clients have included Sony Asia, Roche Vitamins Asia, Nortel Networks, AT&T, Philips Consumer Electronics, and Microsoft. Also included within his business experience in Asia, he was the managing director of Morgan Cars China, CEO of Lotus Cars China, investor and chairman of Eggplant Digital, founder of the British Business Awards in China, and in 2015, the British Motorsport Festival in Beijing, which he also helped found. Despite all that, he was also the vice chairman of the British Chamber of Commerce in China. You guessed it. How does he do it all? Well, he captures that in his new book called The Unnoticed Entrepreneur, 50 Ideas for Your Company to Stand Out. Now, I am absolutely honored to be featured toward the beginning of Jim's new book as he reveals his 5-step Speak PR process that begins with the development of your story he calls storification. You'll also learn about how to trigger the Cascade Theory of people sharing your story. Plus, you can just see how well you're doing overall in Jim's Active Communications Index. All that and more right here on the Business of Story for you with Jim James. Jim, the nut in the hut James, welcome to the Business of Story.
Park, Hal, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm here in the UK countryside. As you know, squirrels live around here and they all gather up nice things. But a friend of mine knows that I work from the garden shed and he just called me the nut in the hut. So I think that's going to stick, I'm afraid.
Well, it's not.
Thank you for having me, Park.
It's not such a garden shed. It's a beautiful little cottage in what I can only picture as a picturesque English garden out there. Can you describe it for us?
Yeah, we live about 5 miles south of Bath in an area called the Cotswolds, which is an area of outstanding natural beauty. And Bath is also on the UNESCO Heritage List. So we are about 75 miles west of London. And it is really idyllic. We've got literally a river down at the bottom of the road. I've got a forest I go walking in with the dog. The only downside, Park, is that the guinea pigs got taken by the fox. So being in the countryside has many upsides, but not if you're a small rodent that lives outside. So
apparently not. And the fox comes up and swipes the guinea pig. There seems like there should be a fairy tale there somewhere.
There's certainly a moral, which the girls learn. And the moral of the story, as I know you like to tell stories, the moral of the story is bring your guinea pigs in before dinner. That was the moral of
Or
the
they will
story.
be dinner. Is that
Yeah,
right?
they were someone else's dinner. Exactly. So, yeah. So, like you, we like to teach stories, and we let the girls discover what would happen if they didn't look after the guinea pigs. So, being in the countryside, it's beautiful. And, when the lockdown happened, Park, the children were off school, so I decided to move out here and electrify the garden outhouse and decorate it. It's very comfortable, very comfortable. And as you can see, we've got all the audio equipment and Wi-Fi and so on.
Well, and you're doing great with that. We were talking before the recording that you and I are both in very remote locations, and you are stuck with boosted Wi-Fi, which I worked on with for about 6 months here, and it was kind of a nightmare. I was never quite sure when it was going to boost or not boost, and we finally got CenturyLink to hook us up with DSL. So that's we don't have fiber, but we have DSL, and it seems to be working pretty good.
So the question is, Park, does having DSL make you talk or think quicker? That seems to be the thing, because I'm looking for the solution to actually being smarter, not just being more connected.
The solution to that is your new book, which we will talk about in a minute. But Jim, you run EASTWEST Public Relations. Tell us a little bit about your background and how did you get into the PR world, and a little bit about how you use storytelling to help grow your clients.
Thanks, Park. Yes, well, I'm originally British, but I've lived overseas in America and Africa throughout my childhood. And one of the things I needed to do when I got to 18 was to raise some money to go on an expedition to Australia. And what I did was I jumped out of an aeroplane in order to raise some money. And what I found was in that afternoon of jumping out of an aeroplane was I could make more money by getting sponsored and turning up to speak for these people who were willing to watch a young guy jump out of an airplane in return for money, about building a brand and about publicity. So that was my first taste, really, where I did something for money and it paid off. And then I went to Australia and on an expedition. But fast forward to university, where I then went to Chapel Hill, actually, so I'm a Tar Heel. Went to Chapel Hill to study as undergraduate. And after I graduated, I went to Asia to start EASTWEST Public Relations all the way back in 1995, Park. So
And why
some of
Asia?
your listeners may be old enough to remember. Well, at the time, back in the mid 90s, Asia was, as it still is, full of opportunity. It was beginning to digitalize the music and television industry, which is the one I was working in. And there was no one in Asia doing public relations in the music and broadcast industry. So I would go out there as a marketing manager representing a hardware company and meet the media, and there were no journalists, no PR people in the region because it's too niche. And I thought, well, I can do that. I'm 27. I don't have any wife and children. Why don't I go and have an entrepreneurial journey? So I started there, and then in 2004 went to China to study Mandarin, and then 2006 started my EASTWEST Public Relations in China. And then in 2010, we opened in India as well. So then I moved back to the UK 2019 after 25 years in Asia, and run a number of different companies. But as far as the PR firm is concerned, it's still operating and serving B2B clients.
And why then did you write your latest book?
Well, Park, you say latest, really kind of my debut, I think, is probably a fairer way
fair
to
enough.
put it. But thank you very my debut book. It's called The Unnoticed Entrepreneur. And the reason is because I wanted to help all those business owners, entrepreneurs that are friends that I'm sure you are really familiar with in your listener group as well, that can get noticed with a little bit of help, but they don't need or can't afford an agency like mine. So agencies tend to serve larger companies, but most businesses are in the sort of million to $2-3 million mark, and they're the ones that actually need the most help getting across the chasm, getting their brand big enough that they can get business that's beyond the social network of the founder. So I wanted to really do what I could for those people that were suffering from COVID. And I decided to start the podcast, the Unnoticed Show, which you've kindly been on, and shared massive amounts of value with us. And Now, a year later, I've got 340 plus episodes of the show, and I've interviewed some 80 entrepreneurs, experts, technologists like yourself. And I thought, well, why don't I make that into an accessible format? And so the Unnoticed Entrepreneur book was born, and it's a curation really, Park. So rather than claiming credit for it, what I've done is to curate the thoughts of 50 people, but within a framework that I developed called Speak PR. So I've built over 25 years of serving over 600 companies across the world, really an approach to public relations, and I know that works. And I thought if I structure the book and all these articles within this framework, and if I may, I'll share with you that framework part. But the book has just come out on the 2nd of September on Amazon and Barnes and Noble, and you're in it along with 49 other people. I won't mention the names because this is your show, and you are in the book.
Oh,
So
that's fine. You could go ahead and mention their name. You start off with John Lee Dumas, so you've got some major names in there. Me not being one of them, but I was so kind of you to have me on your show.
no, Park, absolutely, because say John Lee Dumas kindly came on the show because he just launched his book, The Common Path to Uncommon Success, and he talks about the need to identify your avatar and focus. But then we move into the 5 stages, and just briefly, Storify, which is the S in Speak, is about helping to identify for your clients or your staff or your partners what journey they're going to be going on with you. And I think you are one of the great proponents, Park, that actually the story is not about me. It's not about me, the founder. And there's a big movement out there to sort of talk about yourself as the founder, but actually the whole point of Storify, unless I've got it completely wrong, what you're talking about is that our role as business owners is not to be the story. It's to facilitate the journey of the people that work with us. Is that right?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And yet, you still have to tell that founder story, your origin story, and you have to talk about yourself and your company. But I think where the mistake is made is people get to such navel gazing that it's all about them, and they're not actually thinking about how that story is landing with their customers. So my argument would be, Jim, for you, for me, for anybody, say you're telling your story at EASTWEST Public Relations, you no doubt are thinking about that audience and you're going to tell it a little bit differently depending on who the audience is, but you're going to tell your story from their perspective. That makes sense.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think, a big part of what we talk about this with the Speak PR program then is around storification. And the second is about personalization, which is about what you're talking about, Part, which is about being clear about who you want to be working with, who you're facilitating. So we absolutely have to do the founder story because that sets the context and allows other people to identify whether we're the right person or the right company to work with, right? So if we don't express anything about ourselves and our story, then they have no point of reference, whether we're the right mentor, as it were, for them. So under personalization, that's about then identifying the avatar and identifying the avatar's journey. And we talk about not only where they're at with their business, for example, but also in their day, where are they? In their career, where are they? And that's important because the next part is engage, which is around engaging content. And, so
And
that's
before we go to
absolutely.
engage, before we go to engage, Jim, let's talk a little bit more about that avatar. I think there's some confusion around that, what that means. So when you are saying avatar, are you talking about the personality of the brand and the personality of the owner, or are you talking about the personality of the customer, or is it a combination thereof?
It's the personality of the person that you're serving. And one of the things that I like to think about, Park, is that there's not just the customer. There are actually 3 audiences that we need to serve. So I call them the internal, the external, and the partners. So the internal are the people that you pay to help make things happen. Okay. So those people have, let's call it an avatar or a profile. And when you're doing recruitment, obviously that's really key to understand what kind of personalities, for example. The second then is what most people think about, which is the customers. So most people sort of drive straight into let's talk about our customers. But actually the third category are all those organizations that facilitate your business to work. Now, one of the sources of revenue for me as a PR business is other agencies. Right? And so I need to have a communication piece, a dialogue around what I can do for partner agencies. If, for example, when in China, I was importing cars park as one of my ventures, and one of the key audiences that I had to share information with were the regulators, with the government. So when it comes to avatars, I think it's really important not to get fixated on it just being customers, because we need other people to help deliver to those customers, and we have to make them almost like a social group that they'd all fit in, right? So you need to make sure that the social group of the people you hire for your team or engage on a short term are going to be the right social or chemistry fit for your customers. Okay, so that for me, that's avatar. I think as soon as we can talk about the customer and the people that make the business grow, the company actually starts to grow of its own volition.
Yeah. So you start with storification, because you really got to understand your story and your brand and where's it going and the origin story and so forth, but also know that it needs to be told from your audience's perspective so that they can kind of live vicariously through you. And it's a connection story, essentially. It's like, I like you, Jim. You know, I think you can handle my business. You really understand where I'm coming from. I like your background, but you are inviting them into your story. You only really get that in step 2 in personalization, really understanding the customer persona, the colleague persona, these avatars that you're talking about. And then you were saying, and I had cut you off, let's jump into number 3, and that's engagement, right?
Yeah, engagement is around content. Okay, so it's about creating compelling content. And a big part of what we talk about under the Speak PR program is that, content needs to be 2 things in order to stick and to be shared. It needs to be simple for people to understand, and it needs to be new enough for them to be interested in it. So what's happening is that a lot of people are creating content, but it's content about them, and it's often a rehash. And then they're wondering why they don't get likes or shares and so on. But if we look at content, part of it is the quality of the content, and the other is the context of the content. So we have the creative element, and does it land in terms of, is it affecting is it answering questions in the minds of our avatars? But the other is, how are we delivering it? What context are we placing that information in? So obviously with COVID, everyone's paradigm has changed really, Park, where, you can't talk about anything without some kind of COVID relationship, right? So if it's to do with a new car, in China, they were promoting air purification in the car more than anything else because of the COVID, right? So engaging content isn't just about doing nice things with infographics. It's about making content that's simple and new, and that it's context sensitive. So that's the engage part. There's a little bit more behind that, but I'll share with you under amplification about the Cascade Theory, and about the impact of content which is engaging for amplification. But that's engage. And I think the only thing I'd say about engage, Park, is that many clients, especially the older ones, are still stuck in what I call a one format content type. So many people are still doing text because it's easy, and most people can write. A big part of what we love to do now is to get people to use video, and there are many parts of the Speak PR program, but under amplification, which I'll share about in a minute, we talk about the impact of technology. So engage is about creating content not for you, but for your avatar. What would they understand? What would they like to hear? And when do they need it? Do they need it in a mobile phone format, or do they need it for a desktop, or do they need it in signage? Do they need it on the badge when you go to the doctor? Right. So making content context relevant is really important.
So you've got engagement, both quality and context relevant. Now, number 4 in your 5-step process.
This is amplification, Park. So there is no point in saying something, really smart and having it at home, or, in my shed having the best thing ever if no one knows about it, right? So amplification, and because I think I've got the best thing in the shed, but Amplification is about letting people know, but it's also about getting other people to share your content. So the Cascade Theory, which is by a chap called Watts, who I think now works at Google, but Cascade Theory really talks about people sharing being the most efficient way, a most effective way to get amplification of your content. So amplification, yes, is sending it out on Twitter, Facebook, and so on. That's, if you like, 101 amplification. That's just about setting up enough tools that send your content out. The next level of amplification is when it goes viral, when other people share your content. And there's a Professor Dobbs as well in the US at a university over there, I think in Massachusetts. And they talk about the need to get people to go from being uninterested in your content and receiving it to flipping a switch to being both interested and willing to share your content. Okay. So actually, most people get information, but they're interested to read it, but not to share it. What happens is, in order to change that position of inertia, you have to give them enough reason to want to share it with their network. And that's where that content needs to be simple to understand, because they don't want to share something that they might have got wrong. And it needs to be new enough for them to want to share it, because they want people that receive it from them to see them as someone who shares interesting and new things. So if we look at anything that goes viral, then I brought out the idea of the Uncle Tom. Did you see Captain Tom, Sir Captain Tom Park in America?
No, I didn't. What is that?
He's the English man who in his 90s walked around his garden to raise money for the NHS.
NHS?
The National Health Service.
Okay.
So basically what happens under amplification is Captain Tom is a 90-year-old man who decides to raise money for the National Health Service. And over a period of the next 8 weeks, I think it is, he raised $50 million, like 35 million quid, because actually around the world, what he was doing got amplified. People took pictures and shared them with their networks. And because it was a very simple to understand guy in his 90s, wants to pay back for his hip replacement. And the story is, I just want to pay back for these people that are helping us during COVID. And people gave money from around the world. He got knighted in the end.
Is that right?
So
now that's a great story in and of itself, because here's a 90-year-old man walking around his garden making, all this money for the National Health Service. So that's unique, but most companies don't have that. Do you have an example of maybe a company, a client that you worked with that you guys were very successful in capturing a unique story for them that got amplified?
Well, I think if I can talk about Morgan Park, which is the car brand I launched in China, we use this amplification technique to great effect, because I didn't have a big budget and I was selling a hand-built bespoke car. So, but the secret part was to have the customer in the picture, not me, to have the car in the picture, not me. And I got the customer to take pictures of themselves in the car. And I put these cars actually sometimes outside schools, for example, sometimes in restaurants, sometimes in shopping centers. So I put them in a context that people would like to be seen with the car. And then I used a quick response code on the car. So when they scanned it, they would be sending a picture of the car and all the materials about the car. So within a 5-year period, we went from zero visibility to 250,000, 250,000 unique visitors to our website, all through using this kind of amplification technique. So if you look at Apple's a great example. Apple does very little actually of their own marketing. Everyone that has Apple is an evangelist. So what we're talking about under amplification is when the brand becomes amplified by the users, then we get what we call evangelists, right? And Apple's a great example. Tesla's another great example of that. Virgin is another great example.
Yeah, Virgin is amazing what they do. I had a chance to go to Necker Island in March and meet Sir Richard Branson and did storytelling training out there. We were the first group to come into Necker since COVID. And so we spent about a week there and had a chance to interact with him. And he did this fireside chat that was just over an hour. On the first night we got to meet him, and he just talked about his companies and all the failures he's had that most people don't know about because you get to look at the successes. But he says at the heart of every brand story, it's always about the failures. That's what people want to know. What have you been through that I can relate to, and that you've gotten through it to this next major success, because I want to learn what happened to you in case it ever happens to me, essentially. But talking about one of my all-time storytelling heroes, I even got my book Brand Bewitchery in his hand. So I'm just waiting, Jim, for that phone call any moment now for Sir Richard to call me back down to the island and go through some of his branding with him.
Well, and did you, I mean, I feel like I should be on my knees going, we're not worthy. You can't see this on the, we're not worthy. I can't,
Well,
so I kind of know, I'm going to tell people that.
It's just one of those things that came out of nowhere, Jim. I mean, I got a call from a local agency here called Digital Airstrike in Scottsdale, and they're the ones that had put together the event for their customers, and they wanted some more training to happen on the island besides just hanging out with Sir Richard and and having fun there. And so it all went down in about a week. You were talking about COVID earlier. We had to go through a series of COVID tests to get into the British Virgin Islands and on to Necker, and then back off and back to the U.S. But it was just one of those things, like Joseph Campbell says, when you follow your bliss, like I am with storytelling, doors will open where there were only walls before. And that was a door that just opened out of nowhere. And in under a week's time, we went from snowy northern Arizona to a speedboat clipping across through the Virgin Islands, British Virgin Islands, to land on Necker. But I digress. But I want to come back to saying this is what's so interesting. I think
it's your show, Park, and of course you don't make me feel any worse for being the nut in the hut with that story. I know I'm on my journey to bliss. I just seem to be on the slightly rocky road part of the journey at the minute. But no, I think looking Virgin, as we all know, he's one of the greatest storytellers that there are. So I talk about how I've used it in China as someone that didn't speak the language and built a brand that was unknown in the world's largest car market. So if I can do it, it's not just to preserve of billionaires, even if they got there that way. So So I think what I'd say about that, Park, is that the reason I have personalization around avatar being the avatar that you want to work with rather than about yourself is that if you start this journey of your communications program with your customer, partner, employee in mind rather than yourself in mind, you create different content. Otherwise you're going, oh, it's all about me, so I need to put myself in these positions. I need to do this for me. I need to do. If you say, actually, no, it's about your member of staff, or it's about your partner, it's about your customer, then actually it's quite liberating. Because then you can get case studies, you can get testimonials, you can send goods to people to try, So that's why I love the idea. And amplification, sure, it's about technology, but I think if there's a takeaway for the listeners, Park, it's that true amplification is when your consumers or your staff or your partners become your evangelists, right? And that's when a brand takes on a life of its own, where people are selling for you. And that is really where we should all be getting to. And they'll only do that if they believe they're the center of that story. If they think I'm the center of the story, then why should they bother making me famous?
Absolutely. So we've got your 4. Let's go to number 5. And so storification, personalization through identifying your avatars, engaging them by placing them at the center of the story and giving them new, novel, simple to digest content. And then you want them to amplify it. They really need to become a part of your story because they become your storyteller in essence. What's number 5?
Well, number 5 is just to know. It sounds a simple thing, really, but sort of to quantify, really. And when I say know, what I like to think about is the metric about how much work you're putting in, Park. So there's a little term I'm trying to work on called the Active Communications Index. Because as any of us know that go to the gym, or if you're saving up, it's actually how often you go to the gym and the weights you lift that give you the fitness. You don't get the fitness. There's no point in measuring the fitness, actually. You need to measure how much you put in. The same if you're saving money. You don't get there without saving dollars a day. So the Active Communications Index is to help business owners to identify how much work they should do. And the key here is to do it consistently, Park. So I had a conversation with an entrepreneur the other day in Sweden. He said, well, how much should I do? I do a lot sometimes and not some the other. And I said, the key actually isn't the volume, it's the consistency. So what many people do is they have a product launch or move office or they hire somebody or they raise money and they have this big flurry of activity and then they tail off. So the Active Communications Index has 3 indicators, and it has content times channels times consistency or times frequency. So the idea is that if you consistently create content and send it through those channels, each week, if you just multiply one by the other, you get a number. Very simple. And I'm a PR guy, not a mathematician, right? But if you can keep that Active Communications Index the same every week, then you're going to be building a brand over time. And the association with this, Park, is that if you're going to have a friendship with someone, you need to maintain it, you need to nurture it, right? So if you're really big and throw a big party for everybody once and no one sees you again, you kind of wasted your effort, right? So the knowing is about knowing how much you're doing, build that into a number, because with the number, you can set up some systems. And those systems can then be automated and delegated, because it's, very few entrepreneurs either like the communications part of the business or have got the time for it, worry about cash flow, product development, suppliers, recall. We've all got lots of things to think about. But we need to have a consistency of approach, Park. So knowing how often and where you're sending your information is the 5th part of Speak PR.
And is there a rule of thumb there? And the reason why I ask is I'm just rereading the book, The One Thing, and it's a really great book about getting super focused on what your one thing is and what is the one thing I need to do today in doing it that's going to make everything easier or maybe even unnecessary. It's just a way to really boil down your thinking. And in the book, the author talks about going from a maniac working 12, 14-hour days and outworking everybody to the point of his health and his personal relationships all got, impacted by this, to simplifying and just to taking it not less seriously, but not putting nearly as much effort into it. And I bring that up because so many people are just cranking out content. And I try to stay very consistent. I've got my show, and it goes out once a week and is promoted through all channels and my email, so forth. And people keep prodding me to say, Park, you need to be writing more blog posts, more content. And I don't know. What is that balance? Or have you found something for, say, that young growing company and they don't have a lot of time and money to put it in there? Does your Active Communication Index say, let's start with this index number and see how it works for you, and then we can build from there or subtract from there?
It's a really good question and a very frequent one. I mean, there are some ideas of common best practice. Once a day on LinkedIn is enough. The half-life of a tweet is about 30 minutes. So people say you can kind of be tweeting, as much as you like, and that's okay, but at least of 1 hour. Instagram, the shelf life is only about 2 hours. If you do a YouTube video, it has a shelf life of about 2 days. So one of the problems, Park, is that the shelf life of content is so short that actually, if you're not careful, you get on a huge hamster wheel. What I do again is to think about what is comfortable for you. You should be driving this, not the social media platforms. And if you think about the key channel or channels that you want to be on, that's the other point. So if you're comfortable creating content once a day or once a week or once a month, that's okay, as long as you're consistent doing it. And if you think of, for example, rock and roll bands or people like Spielberg, they don't create content all the time, but people buy their albums or their movies or a book author. So it's about being consistent. And when you turn up with something that's new and easy to understand. But I think the secret really is to not have a huge amount one day and then nothing and then a lot. But so to determine what it is, but the key is to make sure that what you're sending out is adding value. So, Park, I have this little matrix that I created for the ACI, and can I share that with you?
Absolutely.
So,
You're
so
going
what
to
I
have to talk
have
us
is
through it because it's audio here.
it's audio. So, with the Active Communications Index, you have if you have a 2x2, so you have four quadrants. In the 12 o'clock, you have the word consistent. Okay. In the 6 o'clock, you have the word inconsistent. In the 3 o'clock, you have the word innovative. In the 9 o'clock, you have the word dull. So if you're sending out dull information inconsistently, which is your bottom left, okay, you're what I would call unnoticed. If you're sending out dull information consistently, you're a follower. If you're sending out interesting information, innovative information inconsistently, you're an opportunist. And if you are sending out consistently innovative information, then you are an influencer. I can send you the apologies for.
No worries at all. Send me the graphic. We'll put it in the show notes, but I got it now. That's perfect.
The key takeaway here is create something that you think would be interesting and schedule the creation and distribution of those so that they can be relied upon. Okay. There is no point in creating content for the sake of creating content because that's wasting your time and other people's.
Yeah, without a doubt. Well, this is fascinating. So your book, The Unnoticed Entrepreneur, you've got 50 different thought leaders, influencers, whatever in there, but they're all covering these in different areas, these 5 different stages of your process.
Exactly. So what I've done is I've been lucky enough to interview, you and JLD, but also people like Aaron Arlett, who runs a company called Elasticity over there in St. Louis. And I've been able to interview a chap called Nitin Pandey, who runs a parent network in India with over 5 million parents around the world of Indian extraction worried about parenting. So what I've done with the book is to take information from entrepreneurs and from technologists and from practitioners to really illustrate that each of these different points so that if you look at my definition of storification, but it's through your eyes, how you explain it. But the idea of the 5 chapters really, Park, is that entrepreneurs can read lots of tactical information on the internet now, and there are lots of clickbait which says download this, download that. But I think what's lacking is the strategy. Mm-hmm. Entrepreneurs say, "Oh, I hired an influencer, but it didn't work." Or I went to an agency and they said I should do a release. But I think what entrepreneurs need, is an overall approach to the PR program, and that will help them to make better decisions and spend less money on tactical, consultants or content that isn't getting them anywhere. Just in the same way as they need a financial framework for their business to understand cash flow, rather than just let's look at a receipt. Is that a good purchase? They need to have a financial plan. Speak PR hopefully gives them that, but also gives them some case studies where they can see other entrepreneurs like Howard Kaufman, who runs a company in oral care in America, how he's building his brand by building one toothpaste tribe at a time.
That's for one toothpaste tribe at a time. There's an avatar for you.
Exactly.
Well, Jim, thank you so much for being here. Where can people find your book and learn more about the great work that you do?
Well, thank you, Park. They can find me, Jim James, on LinkedIn. And I'm lucky enough just to have my name, Jim James, at EASTWEST Public Relations. Or they can come to eastwestpr.com, and there are links to the book, The Unnoticed Entrepreneur, and also to the whole methodology that we've been talking about, including the course that we have, Park. So thank you so much for letting me slightly probably baffle you. I'm sorry with my quadrants. I'm in PR, obviously. I'm obviously not.
No worries. So once I get video up and running, we wouldn't have this problem because we'll just show it on the screen. But no, you talked us through it. That's great. So
thank you so much. So, and obviously, I would love to talk to anyone about what we're doing. And really, Park, I'm grateful to you because your whole brand story methodology really is the headwater, really. Once people start and I've understood your narrative, it enables them to flow down through the rest of the program. So I'm really grateful to you. I don't think I've stolen anything specifically,
Oh,
but no,
no.
I haven't stolen it, and I've completely credited you with everything. But you've done a huge piece of work as a pathfinder to help companies make their business into a story. So I'm very grateful to you for that.
Well, thank you, Jim. You and I share that. I mean, I got all of my knowledge through other people and other work. I didn't invent anything. I just pieced it together so it would work in business. A little bit like Steve Jobs. You and I are like Steve Jobs. He didn't invent anything. He found technology and worked it together and brought a product that people love. So I just really appreciate being in your book.
Thank you. I appreciate you being in the book and sharing both on my podcast as you did so animatedly and letting me come and share my story. I hope I don't get just known as the nut in the hut, but also maybe as the international entrepreneur that really is the champion of the unnoticed. I'm really here to help entrepreneurs to find a way to get noticed using technology so that they can do this for free and unlock the value in their business. That's really my mission, Park, is many entrepreneurs can use the technology that's available to them to compete with big companies without any real investment other than understanding an approach and putting people at the front of the business and following a very simple methodology, Park. So that's really why I'm here. So thank you for letting me share that message.
Well, it's awesome. And it's worth repeating: the Unnoticed Entrepreneur, 50 Ideas for Your Company to Stand Out by Jim James. We'll have links to all of it in the show notes. And so just like to thank you all for listening to this edition of The Business of Story, where we've got Jim coming to us from England. I'm up here in Northern Arizona, and we kind of are two nuts in our own huts, I guess, at this point.
But if you've been on Necker Island, you've been the band on the sand, haven't you? So.
Well, there is that. I hope I can get Sir Richard on the show someday. That would be quite a boon, but we'll see how that goes. But
if anyone can, you can. Yeah. If anyone can, you can, Park.
Well, thanks, Jim. And thank you all for listening to this edition. Jim was talking about my book, Brand Bewitchery, which did come out about 1.5 years ago, and it's all about my 10-step story cycle system process to help you craft and tell compelling stories for your brand. And it's complex. I'm the first one to say the hero's journey is complex. The story cycle system takes you by the hand so you can do this to craft your own story for your brand, but it is complex. And as Jim said earlier in this show, it's about being simple and novel. And that's why I now am a huge proponent of starting all of your storytelling with the and button, therefore the ABT. I went from the complexity of the hero's journey, the 10-step story cycle system, down to the 3 words of the and button, therefore, because I feel like this is truly where all storytelling begins. I have my new book out with Dr. Randy Olson, who introduced me to the ABT 10 years ago. It's called The Narrative Gym for Business. It's a 75-page guide. Download it. You can digest it in under 90 minutes and have it at your side as you start crafting these and button, therefore, these ABTs, to really build your narrative intuition of setup, problem resolution. Everything else, once you've got that, becomes much easier. Of course, I've got my companion course called the ABTs of Selling. You find that at businessofstory.thinkific.com. In under 18 minutes, through 3 short videos by me, I take you through each of the and, the but, and the therefore statements so that you can start crafting these for emails, for your overall brand story, for your origin story. You can use them as a story listening tool. I mean, the use for the ABT across the board is pretty mind-boggling. So check it out. The Narrative Gym for Business, the book. You can get that on Amazon, both Kindle and print version. And of course, the ABTs of Selling at businessofstory.thinkific.com. And join me back here next week when I'll have another amazing story artist right here for you like Jim. And until then, remember that the most potent story you'll ever tell is a story you tell yourself. So make it a great one. Thanks so much for listening.